My name's Lena Wallace, combat medic, U.S. Army, 27 years old. And apparently, a permanent disappointment. Growing up in Burlington, Vermont, I didn't live in a house, I lived in a resume. My dad, Dr. Thomas Wallace, teaches foreign defense policy at Greenbridge University. My mom, Barbara, runs a think tank with the word global stability in its name. And then there was my older sister, Savannah Wallace, star of every dinner table story, valedictorian, recruited into the Defense Strategy Bureau straight out of grad school. By the time I was in high school, Savannah was already doing interviews with Defense Weekly. She didn't walk, she floated. Her handshake was considered a national security asset. She wore blazers at 16. Meanwhile, I was just trying not to fail physics and sneak in track practice without hearing, "Not everyone gets to be average, Lena." Savannah and I weren't just different. We weren't even playing the same game. She was the family brand. I was the warranty they never read. At family events, she'd drop phrases like multi-domain threat matrix and watch uncles nod as they understood. Me? I once said I wanted to help people, and my dad asked if I meant in a humanitarian internship or as a nurse. He said nurse, like he'd bitten into a lemon. Savannah never missed a chance to remind me what I wasn't. During Christmas brunch my senior year, she raised her mimosa and said, "To Lena, may community college treat you kindly." The room laughed. I smiled like it didn't land. When I told them I was applying to the Army's medical enlistment track, the silence was surgical. My mom blinked like I'd cursed. My dad said, "You mean ROTC, right? Number enlisted." "Combat medic," Savannah chuckled. "You know they make you sleep in tents, right? No espresso machines." "They also get shot at," my mom added, like that was some kind of checkmate. Still, I signed the papers. I passed the ASVAB, cleared MEPS, and showed up to my swearing-in alone. No one came. My recruiter shook my hand and whispered, "Sometimes family shows up later, sometimes they don't." The day I shipped out to basic, my dad gave me a folded $100 bill and said, "If it gets too hard, come home." My mom hugged me like she was saying goodbye to her yoga instructor, but it was Savannah who stuck the landing. "Do me a favor," she said, adjusting her scarf. "Don't embarrass us." That one hit differently. That one stayed. And here's the thing. If you've ever been called the weak link, the letdown, the cautionary tale, you know exactly what that does to you. It either breaks you or it builds something they can't see. Not yet. By the way, if you've ever been underestimated, drop a comment and hit subscribe if you're tired of people like Savannah getting the credit before the fight starts. Basic training didn't feel like a reset. It felt like a funeral for the girl they raised, which was fine. She wasn't invited back. At Fort Ironwood, no one cared where you went to school. They cared if you could carry 60 pounds of gear uphill and apply a tourniquet without shaking. I stopped hearing Wallace, like the Savannah Wallace, and started hearing Wallace? Yeah, she doesn't quit. We did evac drills in the rain, stitched gashes in fake skin under red light, learned to move with our rifles like they were body parts. I wasn't the best, but I never ranked last. When one of the trainees passed out from dehydration, I stabilized him while 3 instructors watched. One said, "Wallace, you're calm under pressure." I wasn't calm. I was angry. Angry works. Savannah once told me, "Wars aren't won by medics. They're cleaned up by them." That's cute. Guess who gets remembered when the bleeding stops? No one from home asked how it was going. No letters, no emails, nothing. Just a group chat where Savannah posted her new security clearance badge, and everyone replied with fire emojis. It's funny. Some people are built to be seen. Others are built to survive when no one's looking. And if no one looks anyway, you might as well go all in. I stuffed the only photo of my family into the bottom of my duffel and stopped checking for mail. At Fort Ironwood, silence from home wasn't strange. It was normal. Everyone had their reasons for who did or didn't write. Mine just came in the form of deliberate absence, but that didn't stop me. By week 6, I could strip and reassemble a field kit blindfolded. By week 8, I could carry a man twice my weight across terrain that would chew up a Humvee. My hands stopped trembling when I touched the IV needles. I didn't flinch at simulated blood or the sound of blanks going off inches from my ear. When graduation came, I wore the uniform with more pride than I'd ever worn anything. My name tape looked right. The patch on my shoulder belonged. Nobody came to see me walk across the stage. I wasn't shocked. I didn't ask them to come either. The Army offered me orders to Camp Claiborne, a forward staging base in Yemen that sounded like a place where things went sideways often. I accepted before they could finish the sentence. Most new medics hoped for Germany, Korea, or somewhere with a Starbucks on post. I didn't care about coffee. I wanted out of the classroom and into something tangible. Camp Claiborne wasn't much, a half-dozen tents, 2 trailers with AC that worked part-time, and a medical outpost the size of a gas station bathroom. The guys called it Camp Barely There. In the first week, I was assigned to a support platoon for vehicle inspections and heat checks. A few of the infantry guys decided I looked soft. One genius left an MRE heater under my cot as a joke. It exploded at 3 a.m. and took half my sleep with it. When I confronted him, he laughed and said, "Didn't know aspirin girls could yell." I didn't yell. I reported the incident and requested to be moved to rotation with Alpha Patrol for external missions. It wasn't petty, it was professional survival. I was approved within 48 hours. Someone had noticed I wasn't there to pass out Advil and smile. On the first mission out, we were on a routine perimeter recon when we got a call about a possible IED near Route Ember. Convoy diverted. I sat in the rear MRAP, fingers tapping against the stock of my carbine, counting every heartbeat until we stopped. We didn't hit the IED. The lead vehicle did. I heard the boom before the dust cloud hit us. Our radio operator screamed. I grabbed my aid bag and moved. The gunner from the lead truck was down, shrapnel in his neck, arterial bleeding slipping fast. I dropped to my knees and sealed the wound with one hand, applied pressure with the other, and called for tourniquets and gauze like it was a grocery list. No hesitation, no second guessing. When the medevac came 20 minutes later, the gunner was still breathing, barely, but breathing. Back at base, the sergeant called me aspirin girl, handed me a lukewarm bottle of water and said, "Didn't think you had that in you." I took the water, didn't say a word. My CO submitted my name for Special Ops Combat Medical Support qualification a week later. It was a long shot. I was still green, still junior. But bleeding under fire gets you noticed. Then, one night, I was on comms rotation when a name popped up on the briefing screen. Savannah Wallace, Defense Strategy Bureau Liaison, now assigned to Joint Regional Command, overseeing intelligence flow to our sector. I stared at that name longer than I should have. She hadn't sent a letter, hadn't asked about my location, but she was, looming behind the screen like she always loomed behind every opportunity I tried to touch. And I knew exactly what it meant. Whatever future I thought I could build out here had just gotten a lot more complicated. Because the person who never believed in me was now technically part of the system, deciding who gets to matter. And when Savannah gets involved, people like me don't move up. We move aside. I stopped mentioning promotions and started memorizing exactly how to stay invisible. It wasn't hard. You show up early, shut up during briefings, execute the work, and disappear before the debrief. Don't volunteer, don't complain, don't look like you're trying. You blend into the background until someone bleeds. And then you're helpful. But only until the bleeding stops. That's how I survived the next few months at Camp Claiborne. We rotated in and out of heat waves, sandstorms, and missions where the goal was, don't die stupid. Still, there were moments, like the time we rolled up on a burning outpost outside Quara and found 2 Marines still inside. Everyone hesitated. I didn't. I tied a wet rag around my face, dove in, and dragged one of them out by his vest while coughing my lungs out. No one said thank you. The guy I saved was unconscious and probably didn't even know I existed. But word travels. That's how I paired with Corporal Dana Brooks, one of the few people on base who didn't treat me like a novelty. Brooks was sharp, didn't waste words, and had zero patience for people who used acronyms to sound smarter. She'd been through hell in Somalia and had the limp to prove it. Said she liked working with me because I didn't freeze or whine. She was the one who showed me how to access the internal personnel pipeline, aka the maybe you'll get promoted list. My name was on there. It had been flagged for field review. She clicked a few times. Here's the final reviewer, Wallace, SDSB clearance level 6. I stared at the screen. You're kidding. Nope. Savannah? How many Wallaces you think are sitting in that building? The knot in my gut pulled tight. I hadn't spoken to Savannah in over a year, not even a sarcastic text, not even a typo. But there she was, reviewing my file, judging me, deciding. I closed the laptop. That's done then. Brooks leaned back in her chair. You sure? You've got enough field hours, enough merit points. Hell, you've probably saved more limbs than our base surgeon. Doesn't matter, I said. The system isn't built for people like me to outrank people like her. That night, I skipped chow and sat outside near the wire, just listening, just breathing. The base wasn't quiet. Nothing ever is out there. But there was something steady in how the generators hummed. It reminded me that machines didn't care who you were. They either worked or they didn't. The next day, Brooks said, you could challenge it, file a counter review, name conflict of interest. No, I told her. Then I'd look weak, or worse, entitled. Maybe, she said, lighting a cigarette. Or maybe you'd just look like someone who knows when the game's rigged. The thing is, I'd already accepted the rules. I wasn't going to climb the ladder. I'd ensure no one under my watch bled out while some intel genius back home ran a PowerPoint. We kept moving, missions, briefings, patrols, and med checks. I got better at reading vitals fast, stitching clean, and improvising with garbage when supplies ran low. I treated a kid with a broken femur using duct tape and a tent rod. He walked again in 6 weeks. Still, the promotion didn't come. No calls, no emails. My record sat in some digital drawer while Savannah's name sat on a wall in Washington. Then one morning, we got hit with a no-notice medevac drill. Simulated multiple casualty event. Everyone scrambled. I handled 3 casualties, stabilized 2, tagged 1 DOA, and ran the triage solo after my CO bailed to take a call. Afterwards, the battalion commander said, "Why the hell aren't you running med support for Alpha Group?" I didn't answer. He nodded as he understood. 2 days later, I got reassigned. Not a promotion, not even a title, just new orders. Task 12X, Classified Logistics Support, attached to Joint Recon Group. I didn't ask questions, I just packed my gear. Savannah once said I'd embarrass the family. If she ever saw the list of things I've done since then, she should be more worried about which parts I learned from her. I folded my new orders into my chest pocket and didn't tell anyone where I was going. Joint Recon Group operated out of Forward Site Foxtrot, a remote outpost in southern Lebanon that looked more like a construction site than a military base. Concrete walls, portable towers, no signposts, no welcome brief. They didn't care who you were, just whether you slowed anyone down. I got tossed into a 6-person recon support team, running low-visibility operations between border sectors. The med kit they gave me had half the standard loadout. When I asked for more tourniquets, the supply guy said, "We ration gear the way we ration patients. Don't waste either." The missions weren't glamorous, no movie angles. We hiked, scanned terrain, monitored illegal crossings, and ate tuna out of pouches. Nights were spent in silence, except for the occasional cursed joke or someone dry heaving from MRE Chile. They didn't ask where I came from. I didn't ask where they lost their fingers. We called the team lead Staff Sergeant Nunez. But there was no first name or backstory. He spoke in code words even when we weren't on the radio. Everyone else called me Doc, which I didn't mind. Beats aspirin girl. On day 9, we got rerouted during a night watch. Heat signatures popped near a known smuggler route, and someone at a desk back home flagged it as a possible insurgent relay. We moved out, low light, NVGs half working, boots kicking up powder. Then the second MRAP clipped an IED buried under roadside debris. No warning, no distant detonation, just raw, chest-crushing violence. I was in the rear, thrown sideways against the cab wall. Something cracked in my shoulder, maybe the gear, maybe the bone. I couldn't tell. By the time I crawled out, 2 of our guys were on the ground. One unconscious, one screaming about not feeling his legs. I didn't think. I just moved. Hands went where they were supposed to. I used pressure dressings, wrapped a collapsed lung, and shoved an airway in place while yelling for morphine. "Doc, your arm's bleeding," someone yelled. "Not the one I need," I said, tightening the seal. We called for air support. Nothing. Wrong coordinates, wrong frequency. We were on our own. We dragged the wounded behind a burned-out vehicle and held for 4 hours. The firefight came in waves, distant at first, then closer, like it had an appointment. Nunez kept returning fire while I rotated tourniquets and whispered to the guy with the collapsed lung, "You're not dying here, not in this ditch, not today." He nodded as he believed me. People in pain believe a lot of things. By dawn, we were down to 5 working rifles and 1 radio barely hanging on. A local runner finally broke through with word. Extraction delayed. Stormy weather over the ridge. Maybe hours. No one swore, no one panicked. We just reloaded and repositioned. At noon, an incoming report from headquarters rerouted the next closest unit, not to rescue us, but to chase down a secondary target nearby. Whatever we were doing was now less important than someone else might be doing a mile east. I didn't say anything. I just pressed harder on a chest wound and thought about Savannah in her clean, well-lit office, writing policy that moved people like chess pieces she didn't know by name. Eventually, a chopper came in under silence protocol. We lifted the worst off first. I stayed on the last flight. They called me the bleeder in the back on the manifest. No rank, no first name, just bleeding, which honestly felt accurate and fine. Recognition is for people who expect it. I wasn't one of them. I signed the medevac report with my left hand and tossed it in a bin no one ever reads. Back at Foxtrot, they gave me a week of light duty and a temporary sling. My shoulder was bruised, not broken, which was somehow disappointing. I'd earned worse. The day after I got cleared, a clerk from admin handed me a sealed envelope with my name and serial. Straight from Joint Command, he said, like he was passing a bomb. Inside was a rejection notice. No explanation, just request for advanced combat medical assignment denied. Recommendation score, not sufficient for current operational standards. I read it twice, flipped it over like maybe I'd missed the part where they said, "Just kidding," and folded it flat. Brooks called me that night on secured comms. "You get it?" "Yeah." "You checked the sign-off?" "Didn't have to." "You sure?" "I know the phrasing. It's hers. Savannah writes like she's testifying before Congress, even when she's denying her own sister a shot." Brooks didn't say anything for a second. Then, "She's gonna bury you from 1,000 miles away, isn't she?" "She already has." It wasn't rage. It was arithmetic. She was the system, and I was the exception that didn't fit. The next day, I walked into the operations trailer and dropped the denial slip on the desk of Major Harlan Pierce, my direct CO. "I'd like to remain assigned to forward field units," I said. He looked up. "This isn't a punishment, Sergeant Wallace. You've been performing above standard. The rejection's probably bureaucratic." "Sure," I said. "And gravity's just a suggestion." Pierce was a career in the military, but not dumb. He saw through the politics and knew precisely how power worked. "You want to keep working under fire," he said slowly. "I want to stay where I can't be erased." He nodded once. That was it. I stayed on with recon runs and made myself too valuable for the bench. My body held up. My hands were steady, and I stopped thinking about what came next, until it found me anyway. 2 weeks later, Camp Claiborne got rocked by intel failure. A humanitarian convoy we were tracking got rerouted through a supposedly safe corridor. It wasn't. 6 dead, 4 missing. All American personnel. The map overlay, the coordinates, and the clearance routing all had Savannah's digital stamp. Pierce called me in without ceremony. "We've got a mop-up op. We're calling it Task Recovery. You're on it. What's the objective? Find the missing, secure remains, patch the story before it leaks. Medical support? You're leading it. No hesitation, no glory. Just fix what broke, quietly." I didn't ask why I was picked. I already knew, because someone up the chain needed a clean hand to cover a dirty mistake. And I wasn't going to say no. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't burn. Savannah's name wasn't on any of the official paperwork, but the coordinates matched a failed routing file from her department. Everyone in the room pretended not to notice. So I packed my bag, stocked my meds, tightened my boots, and looked at the mirror just long enough to remember who I was. Not the sister, not the shadow, not the name they'd rather forget, just the one they couldn't get rid of. I zipped the medkit shut like I was sealing a coffin and stepped onto the transport without saying a word. The Black Hawk lifted at 0300 under blackout protocol. No chatter, no lights. Just engine hum and the silence that only comes when everyone on board knows this isn't a training op. Our target was a ravine west of Azir province, less than 10 clicks from the Syrian border. Unmapped, unsecured, and not a safe corridor. But someone at the Defense Strategy Bureau had labeled it, and now here we were. Our team was 12 deep, 7 infantry, 3 logistics, 1 communications tech, and me. No journalists, no observers, no backup unless things went nuclear. The plan was simple: reach the last known location of the lost convoy, recover survivors if there were any, retrieve bodies if not, and get out without making noise. We dropped in low near a rocky outcrop. The sun wasn't up yet, but the heat was already climbing. I could feel it through my vest. We hiked for 3 hours before we found the first sign. A shredded American flag caught on a crumpled section of APC. Flies buzzed around what used to be a perimeter. I counted 2 destroyed vehicles, 3 shallow craters, and 0 movement. The first body was under the rear axle, burned, unrecognizable, except for the dog tags I had to pry out with pliers. I radioed in the ID without emotion. If you do it too often, it turns into a procedure. 2 of our missing were alive, barely. One had a shattered pelvis and a severe infection. The other had a broken arm and severe dehydration. They'd been hiding in a drainage tunnel, living on ration bars and dirty water. I set IVs under shade, used every saline pouch I had, and dosed antibiotics from a vial that expired 2 months ago but still worked better than nothing. We rigged stretchers from tarp and rope and took turns carrying the wounded through terrain without rain in years. Then the shooting started. We were halfway back to the LZ when the ridge lit up. Short bursts, high caliber, not random. Someone had been watching. I dropped behind a rock, kept the pressure on the pelvis guy's leg, and yelled for smoke. Specialist Rayner, our comms tech, took a round to the shoulder, clean pass-through, no artery. I packed it fast and told him not to be dramatic. We returned fire from low ground. The firefight lasted maybe 10 minutes, maybe a lifetime. I couldn't tell, I just kept moving. By the time we reached the extraction point, my shirt was soaked in blood that wasn't mine. I'd stopped counting how many wounds I'd treated and started tracking how much morphine I had left. The chopper came in hot. We loaded the stretchers while rounds cracked overhead. Once airborne, I leaned against the wall and finally looked at my side. Shrapnel, nothing deep. Just enough to sting. Nobody said anything on the flight back. We were too busy breathing. At base, I handed over my report with clinical detail. Body count: 5 recovered, 2 living. Friendly casualties, 1 wounded, no deaths. The cause of the incident was misrouted intel, which was likely a human error. I didn't name names, didn't need to. Everyone in that room already knew which name it was. The commanding officer skimmed my file, tapped the edge, and said, "This one's classified. Forget you were there." I nodded. And just like that, the corridor that didn't exist became an operation that never happened. I scrubbed the blood out of my sleeves in a sink that hadn't seen soap in 3 weeks and didn't bother changing shirts. There was nothing clean about what we'd just done. Nothing heroic. It was triage on top of damage control inside a PR disaster. Nobody said thank you. Not that I expected it. All I got was an off-the-books debrief and a cautionary nod to stay focused. Then came the new orders. Task 12X was being reassigned. A new target zone, new faces, higher altitude, less room for error. I went quiet again, just me and my kit, and the checklist I ran every night like a ritual. Fluids, chest seals, bandages, morphine, compressed gauze, and whatever hope hadn't expired yet. The next mission launched at night, inserted deep into mountain terrain near the border. 12 of us total, no backup, no SATCOMs, minimal support. The plan? Hike in silence. Extract a pair of contractors gone missing. Probably dead. If not, then not for long. We moved under the moonlight, boots slipping on shale, breathing through our shirts. Halfway up the ridge, we hit a scatter mine. Not a big one, not fatal, but it was enough. Sergeant Locke, second in command, caught a piece through his quad. He went down hard, shouting in a way grown men aren't supposed to. I dropped next to him and opened the leg up fast. Arterial, high flow. If I didn't clamp it, he'd be done in under 2 minutes. I used a hemostat blind, packed the wound, and stabilized him while the others pulled the perimeter. "Can he walk?" one of the riflemen asked. "Not unless you carry him and his femurs separately," I said. They laughed. Nervous laughter. The kind that keeps your trigger finger moving. We rerouted, dragging Locke on a field stretcher. 1 mile turned into 4, and the terrain worsened by the hour. Then the rain started. It's not cinematic rain, not dramatic. Just enough to make everything slick and miserable. The missing contractors turned out to be alive. Barely. One had 2 broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder. The other had been tortured. Fingernails gone. Concussed. No food for days. I worked on both with what I had. I kept them breathing. We moved fast, faster than we should have. And that's when Private Henley tripped a tripwire, and all hell broke loose. The blast hit the side of our column, 3 down instantly. 1 dead on impact, 1 screaming, 1 unconscious. I moved before I could think. I shoved a needle into a collapsed lung, stuck a decompression tube in place, and used my body as a shield while I closed the chest wound. "Why aren't you in cover?" someone yelled. "Because he's not dead yet," I shouted back. I ran out of tourniquets, used strips from my vest. My hands were shaking, not enough to mess up a stitch. Locke was still semi-conscious. He looked over at me from the stretcher and said, "You're gonna burn out doing this. Not if everyone else stops bleeding first." We finally got word. Chopper en route. High priority extraction, 2 hours out. I took a round of shrapnel to my side during repositioning. Didn't mention it, no time. Kept pressure on Corporal Vance, who'd taken a belly wound. I held him upright and whispered nonsense while watching his vitals drop. He died 40 minutes before the bird arrived. I held his dog tags like they might do something. They didn't. When the chopper landed, I loaded the stretchers first, then sat down on the floor with my knees locked and my hands soaked in blood. Nobody said, "Hero." Nobody made speeches. All I heard was the rotor blades, the sound of metal spinning fast enough to erase memory. And honestly, that was fine by me. I left Vance's tags on my bunk and stopped sleeping more than 3 hours at a time. I didn't need dreams to haunt me. Reality did that just fine. 3 days after extraction, I was ordered to report to the Tactical Operations Center at Fort McCoy. No details, just a direct summons with my name on it and a big red confidential stamped across the header. The TOC was colder than usual. Fluorescent lights. A major I'd never met. And next to him, a civilian in a navy blue suit with a file thick enough to break a nose. "Sergeant Wallace," the major began, "you're being temporarily reassigned to Joint Base Anacostia Bowling. Effective immediately." "On what grounds?" the civilian cut in, sliding the folder toward me. "Operational leak, compromised intel on your last mission. Timeline, movement patterns, target profiles, leaked before insertion. You walked into a trap." I flipped the file open. Redacted blocks, coordinates, names I knew, photos of Vance, Locke, even me. The major leaned forward. "We've traced the source to someone with classified access and a personal connection to you." And that's when I saw it. At the top of the second page, Savannah Wallace, DSB Liaison Officer, my sister. I stared at the name like it was some kind of typo. There were 2 Savannah Wallaces in federal clearance databases. "She wasn't supposed to be on this account," I said flatly. She wasn't, but she back-channeled through a partner at ORSA. Accessed data she had no clearance to see. "Why?" I asked. The civilian gave a half shrug. "We think she was trying to leverage details to boost her security credentials. Maybe she thought the operation wouldn't go loud. Or maybe she didn't care." "She got a man killed," I said, voice flat. "Vance bled out because of her." "And several others nearly joined him, including you," the major added. I kept my jaw clenched so tight I felt it pop. "We need your cooperation. We're building the case." I looked at the folder again, not just reading it now, feeling every name, every timestamp. "If I help," I said carefully, "she loses everything, right?" "She's facing felony charges, federal prison, and permanent blacklisting from any agency tied to defense or intel," the civilian replied. Good. The next morning, I was in D.C., meeting quietly with military legal counsel. The investigation had been ongoing for weeks. They just hadn't told me. They had emails, passcode access, time logs. Savannah had leaked intel to an unauthorized contact during drinks at a rooftop bar in Arlington. A friendly and cyber analysis. They thought it would stay internal. It didn't. The ops data ended up in the wrong hands. That's how the tripwire happened. That's how the shooting started. They asked me to confirm details about deployment timelines, who knew what, and how specific troop movements aligned with the leaks. I didn't hold back. "She's my sister," I said. "And if she's the reason that mission went sideways, I want her in front of a court just like anyone else." They nodded, recorded my statement, signed the logs. I left the meeting and went to a bar full of defense contractors. The kind of place Savannah used to frequent. I ordered water, didn't need alcohol, just wanted the noise. Someone recognized me from the hospital base, the medevac team lead. He clapped my shoulder and said, "You're the one they're writing up for the Silver Star, right?" I just stared at him. "Sorry," he added. "Thought maybe you'd want to know. Word gets around." I nodded once and walked out. Back in my quarters that night, I sat on the edge of the bunk and stared at my phone. My sister had called 6 times, left 3 voicemails. None of them said sorry. One said, "It wasn't supposed to go that way." She knew. She just didn't care enough to stop it. I deleted every voicemail without listening and blocked her number like ripping off a tourniquet. The next time I saw Savannah, she was sitting at the defendant's table in a federal courtroom in D.C., dressed in a suit 2 sizes too sharp for someone that hollow. She didn't look at me when I walked in, probably for the best. The room wasn't packed, just government types, attorneys, and 3 press passes that probably weren't allowed to write anything. The prosecution opened with a list of names, lives affected, missions compromised, 1 death, 3 wounded. The rest barely made it home. They made the case that Savannah had accessed classified files through unauthorized channels, passed intel through unsecured devices, and obstructed an internal review to cover her tracks. Her defense? Miscommunication. She didn't understand the clearance levels. It was all a technical mistake. Bullshit. I testified on day 2. They swore me in and asked me to state my name, rank, and unit. Then they asked, Sergeant Wallace, did you personally witness or experience consequences resulting from the leaked intel? Yes, I said. I held Staff Sergeant Vance while he died from injuries sustained during an ambush that happened at a location Savannah had accessed and transmitted. His blood was on my hands. Literally. There was silence, not courtroom silence. Air gone dead silence. Did you know Savannah Wallace accessed those files prior to deployment? Number Y didn't know until after the operation failed. Would you have authorized her access if given the choice? Hell no. The defense attorney stood up and tried to get cute, asked if my testimony might be biased because Savannah was my sister. I leaned into the mic and said, I would have preferred she be a stranger. At least then it wouldn't have felt like betrayal. Savannah still didn't look up. 3 more witnesses followed, all with similar stories, leaked coordinates, compromised drop zones, and near misses turned into direct hits. But the real twist came on day 4. A surprise witness. He was ex-Intel, former ORSA contractor, and Savannah's little partner from the rooftop bar, turned state's evidence to avoid prosecution. He testified that she knew what she was doing, that she'd said, quote, "It's not like medics are the ones taking fire. I laughed out loud from the gallery, got a warning from the bailiff. Didn't care." Savannah finally looked at me then, and for the first time in years, she looked afraid. Not guilty, afraid, caught afraid. When closing arguments wrapped, I walked out before the jury went in. I didn't need a verdict to know what she was. She was the reason a man didn't come home. I stood on the sidewalk outside the courthouse, trying not to punch a wall, when Major Perry from the Pentagon approached. "Wallace," he said, not smiling. "The Joint Chiefs want a private debrief. Walter Reed tomorrow. They're compiling full recognition documentation." I blinked at him. Recognition. For valor and for providing the testimony that helped shut down a serious breach. Some folks want that buried. Others don't. Am I supposed to care which? He shrugged. Just show up. Dress uniform. I didn't sleep that night. Thought about the day Savannah got her NSA internship. How proud our parents were. How invisible I'd felt. The only difference now was that Savannah finally did something I couldn't be blamed for. In the morning, I stood in front of a panel of 6 uniformed officials, walked them through my medical response timeline, the tactical decisions made in the field, and the exact moment I realized our mission had been fed to someone else. They didn't interrupt once. Afterwards, they handed me a confidential envelope and said I'd hear from White House personnel if the president's office moved forward with the recommendation. I nodded. I folded the envelope in half and tucked it into my breast pocket like napkin trash. On the steps outside, I lit a cigarette I hadn't earned and didn't want, just to give my hands something to do. A woman from the base hospital passed me on her way in and said, "Thank you for what you did in the valley." I said, "He still died." She paused. "Yeah, but 4 didn't." And I didn't know what to say back for the first time since the mission. I left the envelope on the kitchen counter and drove until my gaslight arrived. Outside Richmond, I stopped at a 24-hour diner that smelled like overcooked bacon and permanent regret. I sat at the counter, ordered bad coffee, and stared through the steam as if it owed me something. The waitress slid me a check before I even asked. "You look like you're running from something." "Running's generous," I said. Back at the base, I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a 2-paragraph letter from the Office of the President. Simple language, clinical tone, recognition of distinguished conduct under hostile engagement, pending approval for the Distinguished Service Cross. But there was more, a sealed statement from the National Security Council. I unfolded it carefully. It confirmed that intelligence provided under duress during Operation Blue Halo had prevented 3 separate coordinated attacks on U.S. diplomatic posts in the Middle East. One of the attacks was set to happen in Cairo, where Savannah had been stationed for a year during her analyst assignment. It hit me in the gut. She hadn't just leaked intel. She triangulated what missions were coming next, what units were being moved, and when, which meant that at some point she had decided those attacks were acceptable losses. Or maybe she thought they'd never happen. Maybe she thought she was playing spy, not traitor. But people died. I didn't care how pretty her resume looked. It was soaked in blood now. I stared at the letter for a long time, then dropped it back in the envelope like it was radioactive. 2 hours later, I stood outside my parents' house. I hadn't called. They hadn't called me since the trial. My mom opened the door like she expected someone else. Her expression cracked when she saw me. "Lena," she said, "you should have told us you were coming." Would it have made a difference? She stepped aside. "Come in." I walked through that polished foyer, where I used to leave my muddy boots and get yelled at for scuffing the tile. Nothing had changed. Not the rug. Not the framed photo of Savannah's graduation. Not the silence. My dad sat at the table with a newspaper and a glass of bourbon like he always did when pretending not to be stressed. "I read the story," he said without looking up. "The one about the medal." I didn't answer. "You didn't mention the part where your sister caused it." I leaned against the wall. That part wasn't for the press. My mom hovered like she wanted to fix something. A coffee, a memory, a daughter. She was misguided, Lena. Not evil. She handed over troop positions for a thrill. She didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. She did. My voice didn't shake. I wasn't there for a fight. I was there because I had something they deserved to know. I pulled out the second letter, the NSC one, and slid it onto the table. "What's this?" my dad asked. "Confirmation," I said, "of what she did, of what she risked." 3 attacks stopped, because of intel I transmitted, which only existed because of what she leaked. My mom's hands trembled. She didn't pick up the paper. "She's not the only one who gets to define what this family means," I said. "And if you're still proud of her, that's fine. But don't pretend she's the only one who mattered." They didn't stop me when I left. Back at Walter Reed, I clocked in for my shift like nothing had happened. The patients didn't care what medals were pending. They cared that I knew how to read their pain and didn't flinch when they talked about it. A young Marine named Booker grabbed my hand during a dressing change and said, "You're different from the other docs." I said, "I'm not a doc." He grinned. "Exactly." I found a small envelope under my door the day before the ceremony. No return address. No name. My name was written in handwriting, and I knew better than my own. Savannah. Inside was a single photo. The 2 of us, ages 7 and 10, in matching Halloween costumes. Ghostbusters. On the back, she'd written 4 words. "I never deserved you." For a second, I didn't know whether to tear it up or burn it. Instead, I stuck it in my sock drawer. Not out of forgiveness, but because sometimes it's not about erasing the past. It's about knowing where it belongs. I folded the photo in half and locked it inside a drawer I didn't plan on opening again. The morning of the ceremony, I stood in front of my mirror, adjusting my dress uniform like I'd been doing it my entire life. Every ribbon is in place. Every button is straight. I knew the weight of each medal, where I earned it, who bled for it, who didn't come back. I walked into the White House like I belonged there because I did. The East Room smelled like fresh flowers and nervous protocol. Rows of chairs were filled with brass and polished shoes, the kind of people whose opinions had once meant everything to my parents. Now I saw them for what they were, just people trying to make sense of sacrifice from a distance. I spotted my mom and dad near the back. My dad was wearing the same suit he used to lecture in. My mom had her pearls on like she was going to church. They both looked like they'd swallowed something sharp. I didn't wave. 3 other recipients were being honored that day, 2 Marines and a Navy corpsman. Their stories were printed in the program. Mine wasn't. It was still redacted. When the aide read my citation, I stood at attention and stared ahead, jaw locked. Sergeant Lena Wallace, United States Army, distinguished herself through acts of conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an armed enemy force during Operation Blue Halo. I heard the rest through the static. Then came the part that wasn't in the script. The president said, "Some actions deserve more than a medal. They deserve to change how we see what service means." He paused, then looked straight at me. Sergeant Wallace's decisions under fire saved 15 American lives directly. Her radio intel, transmitted while wounded, provided the breakthrough for an operation that rescued 26 more, including one of my own. A beat of silence. My nephew was among the hostages. Today my family stands because she didn't fall. He turned toward me and saluted. "Sergeant Lena Wallace, on behalf of a grateful nation." He placed the Distinguished Service Cross around my neck. The metal was cold. My spine stayed straight. As he shook my hand, he leaned in and said, "This will never be enough, but I hope it's something." I nodded. "It is, sir." Camera shutters clicked like gunfire. At the reception, generals shook my hand with practiced gravity. Cabinet members made polite comments. A few reporters tried to press for details, but I gave them nothing. I'd lived it. They didn't get to package it. I was halfway through a flat soda when I saw my parents hovering by the cheese tray like they were at a faculty party. They approached slowly. "You looked very composed," my mom said first, her voice thin. My dad cleared his throat. "The president said your actions saved his nephew." "Yeah," they waited for me to elaborate. I didn't. "I suppose we owe you an apology," he said, "for not understanding." "No," I said. "You owe it to yourself. I always knew what I was doing." My mother's lips trembled. "We should have asked. We should have tried." "It's not about medals," I said. "It never was. You just didn't want a daughter who served. You wanted a daughter who impressed your friends." They flinched like I'd hit them. I softened. "A little. But I get it now. You were afraid. You didn't know how to love something you couldn't control." My father swallowed hard. "Can we try again?" I didn't answer, because in that moment I realized something deeper. I didn't need them to get it. Not anymore. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted Corporal Ramos, one of the men I pulled from that hellfire valley, saluting me across the room. He had both legs in braces and a cane, but his eyes were clear. Proud. I turned back to my parents. "You're not the ones I answer to." I walked toward Ramos without waiting for a response. He grinned. "Thought you'd look taller with that medal." "Yeah, well, maybe the ribbon shrunk in the wash." He laughed. "Drinks on me tonight?" "Only if you're buying something stronger than government soda." We left together, and the White House got smaller behind us. I tossed the medal case onto my bed and left it there as it weighed too much to carry anymore. 3 days later, I was back at base, standing before a group of fresh recruits who looked more like first-year college students than future medics. One of them had braces. Another asked if we'd get weekends off. I didn't laugh. I just told them the truth. No one cares how much you know until they're bleeding out and you're the only one who can stop it. Their faces went pale. That was fine. Fear was honest. At night, I worked on a proposal. It wasn't glamorous. It was a new trauma simulation protocol using real-time decision stress metrics. Colonel Briggs greenlit the pilot within a week. "You might actually be useful off the battlefield," he joked. I smirked. "Don't let that rumor spread." One morning, a package arrived at my quarters. No return address, just my name in sharp handwriting. Inside was a wooden box, simple, polished, and unmistakably handmade. The lid creaked open. Inside, my mother had arranged a folded flag, my ribbons mounted carefully on velvet, and newspaper clippings from the White House ceremony. Below that, a black and white photo I'd never seen before. My grandfather in uniform, holding a cigarette and squinting at the sun. Tucked behind it, a note in her handwriting. "Your grandfather came back quiet, too." I wish I'd asked more. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from her. And it was enough. I brought the shadow box to my office and placed it next to a framed photo of my team, Torres, Vance, Ramos. It wasn't for display. It was for memory. That weekend, I visited Torres in recovery. She had a titanium plate in her shoulder and a new tattoo running down her arm. "You're limping less," she said. "You're still hogging all the morphine." We sat quietly for a while, drinking bad coffee. "You think any of them really understand what happened out there?" she asked. "No," I said. "But they don't have to. We do." I didn't hear from Savannah again, at least not directly. But one day, a junior officer knocked on my door, nervous. "Ma'am, there's someone asking to speak with you, civilian." Out in the hallway stood a woman in a dark suit, not military, not press. "Agent Lily Trask," she said. "FBI. I'm here about a separate matter involving your sister." My jaw locked. "She's not my problem." "No, but her security clearance is—" Savannah had tried to spin a freelance consulting gig off her former access to classified logistics. Nothing criminal, just sloppy. "You want my help?" I asked. "No," Agent Trask said. "Just your confirmation that she was not involved in the planning or execution of Operation Blue Halo." I didn't answer immediately. Then I said, "Savannah Wallace was never in the room." Trask nodded. "We figured as much. Thank you for your time, Sergeant." She left. I exhaled. It felt like releasing the last thread, tethering me to the person I used to be, the sister trying to prove her worth. Now I had different priorities. That night, I led a trauma drill that ended with a recruit in tears. I didn't yell. I sat beside her and walked her through the mistakes. "This isn't about perfection," I told her. "It's about not quitting when it matters most." She nodded, wiping her face. I walked home alone under the fluorescent buzz of the corridor lights, the sound of boots and chatter echoing off steel. There was no crowd, no applause, just the quiet pulse of something steady. Purpose. I stepped into my quarters, sat at my desk, and wrote a letter, addressed to no one, meant for someone someday. It began, "If you're reading this, it means you're wondering if any of this mattered." It did. I left the letter unsealed on my desk and walked outside to feel something real. The night air hit me like a reset button. I crossed the quad, past the flagpole, past the half-lit benches where exhausted trainees smoked cheap cigarettes, and pretended the world made sense. No one stopped me. No one asked. I think they knew by now. When I walked like that, I wasn't looking to talk. I sat on the cold concrete steps at the base chapel, not praying, just existing. A sergeant I barely knew sat down next to me. We didn't speak for a long time. He finally said, "You the one from the mountain op?" I gave him a look. He nodded. Didn't think they made medics like that anymore. I didn't respond. Compliments meant nothing if they came from myths. He took the hint and left. I stayed. Watched a raccoon fight with a trash bag. And then I got up and walked back to my room. When I opened my door, the letter was gone. In its place was a small folded note. It wasn't signed. "You don't owe them silence anymore." For a second, I thought someone had broken in, but nothing was touched. Nothing missing, just the note. My first instinct was paranoia. Maybe a test, a trap, some security thing. But deep down, I knew what it meant. Savannah was gone. Not dead, just evaporated. Her name had vanished from all internal directories. Her office was reassigned. No announcement, no reprimand. Just absence. The military had its way of dealing with leaks, especially when the leaker shared DNA with someone publicly celebrated. A week later, I got a sealed package from someone in internal affairs. Unofficial, off the books. Inside, one flash drive. I don't know why I plugged it in. Curiosity, or maybe recklessness. It held a single video file, time-stamped months earlier. Grainy footage from a secure camera. Savannah in uniform is sitting across from a contractor. Talking too fast, eyes darting. Showing something, classified maps, overlays. Stuff I recognized instantly. The audio was fuzzy, but I caught enough. She had been trying to sell access. Justify it with some twisted logic about influence, making herself relevant again. And worst, she mentioned me. Said I was media gold now. said she could spin proximity into profit. I shut the laptop. I didn't report it. I didn't need to. She was already gone, buried by the same system she once weaponized. Some would say I should have felt satisfaction. I didn't. I felt free. Free from the idea that I needed to compete. Free from the illusion that family had to be earned. Free from measuring my value against her contempt. In the following weeks, I trained a new unit. Some of them had heard about the medal. A few tried to be subtle about it. One asked, "So, do we call you war hero now?" I said, "Only if you're bleeding out." They got the message. Captain Harlow from command called me in for a meeting. A VA rep requested to speak at a symposium for veteran mental health. Panel discussion, press coverage. I almost laughed. Me? Talk about trauma to civilians in polos holding coffee? He said, "You don't have to go. But people listen when you speak." I agreed, not because of the spotlight. If one medic heard something helpful, it was worth it. At the symposium, I spoke plainly, no notes, just memory. I talked about silence, the way it corrodes, the way it's mistaken for strength. I said, we don't need more statues. We need more conversations that don't feel like interrogations. The room went quiet in the best way, not awkward, respectful. Afterwards, a young woman approached me, said she was a trauma nurse now, said she'd served in Fallujah, said she'd lost a friend in a convoy and still heard the blast in her dreams. She didn't cry, she didn't shake. She just said, "Thanks for not sugarcoating it." I nodded. That's the least we can do for each other. Back on base, my office filled up with more than shadow boxes. Recommendations, invitations, requests to train special units. It all felt surreal. The medal never changed who I was. It just made people squint a little harder to see it. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the window and barely recognized her. This woman people now called leader, mentor, and even hero. But I never forgot who I was when none of those words applied, when I was just the younger sister, the disappointment, the girl everyone underestimated. And maybe that's why I still woke up at 0500 and did the damn work, because the real fight was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. I tapped the edge of my metal case twice, slid it into the drawer and shut it like I was sealing a chapter I never planned to reopen. Morning light crept past the blinds as I laced my boots and grabbed my pack. No ceremony, no fanfare. Just me and the gear, ready to teach. At Fort Redwood Training Center, the halls echoed with trainees, young, eager, sometimes nervous, sometimes cocky. I remembered what that felt like. The commander greeted me with a nod. "Ready for the first simulation?" I looked at the mannequins sprawled on the floor, mock wounds prepped and ready. Heated lights, smoke machines, timed responders. Everything felt real. "More than ready," I said. We ran it 3 times. Each round got tighter, faster, sharper. One trainee messed up a tourniquet and froze. I stepped in and guided his hands. He met my eyes and nodded like he'd just unclogged something in his head. Behind me, I heard the commander's chuckle. "That's why they brought you here." The day stretched with drills, lectures, and debriefs. At noon, 2 Army Rangers walked in. They'd served under me on Blue Halo. One gave me a short salute. "Sergeant Wallace," he said. "Heard about the talk yesterday. Real words." "Thanks," I said. He hesitated. "Wanted to say, your story made a few of us rethink why we do this." I nodded, eyes forward. "That's enough for me." After training ended, a group of recruits surrounded me. One held out a challenge coin, engraved with our unit insignia. "From all of us," he said. "So you remember, we saw you, even when they didn't." I slipped it into my pack. No words, just a quiet nod that meant more than applause. Back in my room, I pulled out the medal that came out that night. I opened it and looked at the cross on the ribbon. It was real. Heavy, earned. But I didn't need it. Instead, I grabbed a photo from my desk. Me, Torres, Ramos, and Vance's dog tags hung across my wall now. A makeshift memorial. I pinned the coin beneath the photo. I reached for my phone and drafted a text to Brooks. The first one in months that didn't start with a report or emergency. Dinner tomorrow, my treat. I stared at the message, then hit send. No fireworks, no speeches. Just a life unfolding in quiet purpose. I thought about my sister. Somewhere, maybe she disappeared from their records. But she was still in mine. Her mistakes, her truths. I didn't need to see her face. I just needed to know who I wasn't. I slid the medal back into the case and closed it. Tomorrow I'd teach them how to run toward the wounded. Tonight I rested, knowing someone else would do the same. Because this time, I didn't need them to clap. I used to think I needed their recognition to matter. Now I know I never did. What I did out there, what I gave up, what I carried home, it wasn't about applause. It was about not turning away when it got hard, about standing when everything told me to crawl. I still don't have all the answers. I still wake up some nights in a sweat, my heart pounding. But I get up, I keep going. And maybe that's enough. Because I'm not the girl they left behind anymore. I'm the woman who came back. If this story hit something real for you, maybe you've lived through your version of being counted out, of proving your worth when no one believed in you, go ahead and subscribe. We tell raw, no-fluff family revenge stories here. Not the kind with villains and capes, but the ones where the wounds are personal, and the payback is showing up stronger. Hit that button if you're into family stories that aren't always pretty, but always real.